Vincent Caruso didn't believe in ghosts, but standing in his Boston penthouse at 2 a.m., with blood on his cufflinks, he wondered if the trembling woman before him might be one. Grace Sullivan pressed her finger to her lips with desperate urgency. Don't let her hear you. In Vincent's world, people didn't tell him what to do. He gave orders that ended lives and kept peace between Boston's most dangerous families. Yet something in the housekeeper's dark eyes' terror mixed with determination made him freeze. What the hell is going on in my house? His voice came out deadly low. Grace grabbed his arm with surprising strength, pulling him toward shadows near the grand piano. If you go in there now, it'll only get worse for them. Them. His children. 7-year-old Nathan and 5-year-old Ethan were supposed to be asleep. He'd spent the evening handling business at the docks, the kind that left men bleeding. He'd come home early for once, carrying guilt heavier than the Beretta at his ribs. From deeper in the penthouse, he heard it. A child's voice, trembling. Not asleep. Not safe. Grace's hand clamped over his mouth. She'll hear you. Trust me. 60 seconds. No one called him Vincent. Not his soldiers. Not his business partners. Not even Isabella, his fiancée who preferred darling. But Grace said it like a prayer. They moved through shadows he knew intimately. As they approached the playroom, Grace positioned him behind a column. Then she pointed through the doorway. Vincent saw his son kneeling on the Persian rug, small shoulders shaking. Nathan stood rigid beside him, hands clasped like a prisoner. And towering over them, pacing in designer heels, was Isabella Romano, his fiancée, the daughter of Marco Romano. Their engagement was a treaty between warring families. You think crying will change anything, Ethan? Isabella's voice sliced through the air. Your father isn't here. He's never here. And when he is, he's too weak to do what's necessary. Vincent's vision blurred red. Weak children become dead weight, Isabella continued. In my family, we eliminate dead weight. Be grateful I'm only teaching you discipline. She crouched to Ethan's eye level. Tell me what you are. Ethan's tiny voice whispered. Worthless. The word detonated in Vincent's chest. If you are listening to this and feel that the story touches something quiet and unspoken inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to like and share this video so we can continue bringing heartfelt stories every single day. And if it is not too much to ask, tell me where you are watching from and leave a comment below so we know which corner of the world this story has reached, because we treasure every word you share with us. Vincent lunged forward. The killer's instinct surged through his veins like molten fire. He would snap Isabella's neck with his bare hands, but Grace stopped him with a strength unimaginable for a woman of such slender frame. She pushed him against the wall, her entire body pressing tight to hold him in place. Not yet, she whispered, her voice cutting like a blade against flesh. If you go in there now, she will twist everything around. You will become the villain. She will threaten to leave and take the Romano alliance with her. You know this game. Vincent knew. He knew it all too well. The engagement to Isabella was never about love. It was a peace treaty written in blood and money. But his child, his own flesh and blood, was kneeling on that floor and calling himself worthless. Grace pulled a phone from her pocket, the screen glowing bright in the darkness. You need to see this before you do anything. She pressed play. The video appeared, filmed from above, perhaps from a hidden camera in the chandelier. Vincent recognized his own living room, and he recognized Nathan, his son, being dragged by the hair across the marble floor by Isabella. The boy made no sound, no crying, no screaming, only teeth clenched in silent endurance, like a small warrior who had grown too familiar with pain. The next video, Ethan sat in the corner of the room, tears streaming down his chubby cheeks. Isabella walked over, and without a single word of warning, her hand swung upward and struck the 5-year-old boy straight across the face. The slap echoed like the crack of a whip. Ethan stumbled sideways, but did not dare cry out loud. Then Isabella's voice rang out in the video, cold and cruel enough to send chills down the spine. Your mother was weak too. That is why she died. The screen went dark. Vincent realized his hands were trembling. Not from fear. They trembled from the rage burning inside his chest, threatening to consume everything in its path. His hand instinctively reached for the Beretta holstered at his side, fingers gripping the handle in a reflex carved deep into his bones. Grace placed her hand on his arm, not to restrain him, but to pull his attention back. 12 recordings like this, she said, her voice steady and unwavering. 3 months I have been watching. She only does it when you are away. Only when you are at the docks, at those late-night meetings, at all the places where your empire needs you more than your children do. 3 months? Vincent's voice came out like the growl of a wounded beast. 3 months. 90 days. More than 2,000 hours. His children had endured hell while he believed they were safe in their own home. Grace nodded, her eyes showing not a trace of fear before the fury blazing within him. 3 months Isabella Romano has been free to torment them while you built your empire. 3 months your children learned to stay silent just to survive. 3 months they waited for someone to save them, but no one came. Every word pierced through Vincent's chest like a blade. He was Vincent Caruso. He kept peace among the most dangerous families in Boston. He ordered men killed without blinking an eye, yet he had failed to protect his own children. Why? He asked, his voice hoarse and strained. Why did you watch? Why did you record all of this? Who are you? Grace looked at him. And in those dark eyes, Vincent saw something deeper than fear, something stronger than determination. He saw purpose, a mission. The one who has been waiting for you to come home early for the past 3 months, she answered. The one who will tell you the truth. But not now. Right now, you need to stay silent and observe, because what you just saw is only the tip of the iceberg. Before Vincent could demand answers, a sound cut through the darkness. A phone rang from the playroom, its cheerful melody mocking the hellish scene before them. Grace tightened her grip on his arm, pulling him deeper into the shadows behind the pillar. Through the crack in the door, they watched Isabella pull a phone from her pocket, glance at the screen, then raise a finger to her lips to silence the children. She stepped away, toward the window overlooking the Boston skyline. Her back turned to Nathan and Ethan. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But in the silent penthouse at 2 a.m, every syllable still found its way to Vincent's ears. 15 years in the underworld had trained him to catch confessions amid the noise of nightclubs. And now, those same ears were capturing every fragment of a conversation Isabella believed no one could hear. Tomorrow night. Her voice was soft as breath, yet clear as a bell. Vincent held his breath. The documents are ready, Isabella continued, one hand smoothing her perfect hair, while her eyes remained fixed on the city lights beyond the glass. Grace stood motionless beside him, but Vincent could feel the tension radiating from her body like an electric current. He suspects nothing. A quiet laugh escaped Isabella's red-painted lips, the laugh of someone holding victory firmly in her grasp. Then came the final sentence, the one that made the blood in Vincent's veins freeze solid as if doused with liquid nitrogen. The children will no longer be a problem. A problem. His children were a problem. Nathan, 7 years old, with eyes aged far beyond his years. Ethan, 5 years old, whose laughter he could no longer remember the last time he heard. They were problems to be solved in the eyes of the woman he was about to marry. Isabella ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket with the grace of a predator who had just marked her prey. She turned around, and as if flipping an invisible switch, a gentle smile bloomed on her lips. The smile Vincent once believed was love. The smile he now recognized as nothing more than a mask hiding a venomous serpent. Now then, time for bed, Isabella said to the children, her voice sickeningly sweet. She approached Nathan and Ethan, the 2 children still standing motionless like statues, their empty eyes fixed on the floor. And remember this. Isabella leaned down, placing a hand on each child's shoulder in a gesture that might look affectionate to an outsider, but Vincent could clearly see how her fingers squeezed tight, her blood-red nails digging into the thin fabric of their pajamas. If you say anything to your father, I will make sure you never see him again. Ethan trembled but did not dare move. There are schools very far away, Isabella continued, her voice still sweet but cold as ice. In places where even airplanes take 2 days to reach, where no one knows who you are, where you will be completely alone. She tilted her head, the smile never leaving her lips. Do you understand? Nathan nodded first. A mechanical, soulless nod, like a robot following its programming. Then Ethan, his eyes still wet but no more tears falling, nodded after his brother. Good children. Isabella straightened up, brushing off her hands as if she had just completed a household chore. Now go to your rooms. The 2 children walked away, their small hands finding each other in the darkness, holding tight as if afraid the other would vanish if they let go. Vincent watched the small figures of his children disappear down the hallway, and inside his chest, something shattered beyond repair. Not his heart. His heart had hardened long ago in this world. It was his belief, the belief that no matter who he was, no matter what he did, at least his children were safe in their own home. The children moved through the dark hallway, their small footsteps making no sound on the velvet carpet. They had learned to move like ghosts in their own house, and when they passed the pillar where Vincent was hiding, his heart stopped. Nathan turned his head. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was the intuition of a child who had grown too accustomed to staying alert. But in that moment, the eyes of the 7-year-old boy met the eyes of the father he had been waiting for through 3 endless months. Vincent saw everything in those eyes. He saw pain buried beneath a shell of silence. He saw fear that had become a constant companion. He saw hope, but not the bright hope of a normal child. This was exhausted hope. Hope that had been strangled and crushed too many times until it remained only a flickering light at the bottom of a deep, dark well. Vincent wanted to step out, wanted to pull his son into his arms. Wanted to say that Father is here now. Father will protect you. Father will never let anyone hurt you again. But before he could move, Nathan did something that shattered Vincent's heart into a million pieces. The boy did not call out, did not run to his father, did not cry or ask to be held. Instead, Nathan only gripped his brother's hand tighter, turned his face forward, and continued walking as if he had never seen anything at all. 7 years old. His son was only 7 years old, but the boy had already learned the most brutal lesson this world had to teach. Silence means survival. Reaction means danger. Hope is a luxury that cannot be afforded. Nathan had seen his father, had recognized salvation standing just a few steps away, yet he still chose to walk on into the darkness, because he knew that one sound, one wrong move, could make everything worse. His son had learned to trust no one, not even his own father. That look, that brief moment when father and son's eyes met and then parted, broke something inside Vincent that no bullet, no blade, no torture had ever reached. He had killed men. He had ordered executions. He had watched enemies beg without blinking. But never, not once in his life, had he felt pain like this. Ethan followed his brother, completely unaware that his father stood in the shadows, just steps away. He was too small, too tired, too accustomed to keeping his head down and walking on. The two small figures faded into the end of the hallway, and Vincent stood there, his hand still gripping the gun without realizing it, his eyes still fixed on the empty space where his son had just looked at him. Grace touched his elbow gently, pulling him back to reality. "She checks the children's room at 3 a.m, she whispered, her voice urgent but calm. "Every night, the same routine, to make sure they have not sneaked away to call anyone. We have 1 hour. Vincent swallowed hard, his throat dry and raw as if swallowing sand. 1 hour to do what? Grace looked straight into his eyes, and in the dim light from the window, Vincent saw the steel determination in the eyes of this mysterious housekeeper. To get them somewhere safe. To understand what those documents she mentioned are. To find out why your children will no longer be a problem after tomorrow night. 1 hour, 60 minutes, 3,600 seconds to save the children he had failed to protect for 3 months. Vincent looked toward the children's bedroom, where Nathan and Ethan lay in darkness, perhaps pretending to sleep, perhaps praying for a miracle. "Lead the way," he said to Grace, his voice low and solid as a vow. "I will not waste another second." Before Vincent could follow Grace, a scream tore through the night. Ethan's scream, high and desperate, echoed throughout the penthouse like an alarm. Vincent did not think, did not calculate, did not care whether Isabella heard. He ran. The instinct of a father blazed fiercer than any survival instinct he had possessed in 15 years as the head of Boston's underworld. His feet flew down the hallway, his heart pounding as if it would burst from his chest, and in his mind there was only one thought: his son. His son was screaming. He reached the children's bedroom in seconds, his shoulder slamming into the doorframe as he rushed in too fast. But when he got there, the screaming had stopped. In its place was something far more painful: muffled sobbing, crying strangled into near silence, the sound of a child who had learned to suffer without making a noise. In the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains, Vincent saw Nathan sitting on Ethan's bed. The 7-year-old boy was covering his brother's mouth with one small hand, while his other arm wrapped tightly around his shoulders as if trying to hold him together before he shattered. The boy was doing the work that adults should have done, protecting his brother, keeping him quiet, shielding him from the wrath of the monster sleeping in the next room. When Nathan looked up and saw his father standing in the doorway, the boy's face crumbled, not crumbling from fear or pain, but crumbling between two opposing emotions: relief and terror, hope and despair. He wanted to run to his father but feared the consequences, wanted to cry but feared the sound would carry, wanted to be saved but had grown accustomed to saving himself. "Nightmare, Papa," Nathan said, his voice trembling but still fighting for control. He removed his hand from his brother's mouth, his small fingers quickly wiping the tears from Ethan's cheeks. "He just had a nightmare. It is nothing. We are fine. 7 years old." His son was only 7 years old, but had already learned to use lies as a shield, had already learned to hide the truth to protect himself and his brother, had already learned that in this house, truth was a dangerous luxury. Vincent stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He walked to the bed, knelt down before his 2 children, and placed himself at their eye level. This was something he had never done before. In his world, People knelt before him, not the other way around. But tonight, in this dark room, he was willing to kneel before two small souls who had endured hell because of his absence. "I know," he said, his voice so choked he barely recognized it as his own. "I saw, I heard, everything." He raised his hands, touching Nathan's cheek, then Ethan's, wiping away the tears still wet on their faces. "And I swear on your mother's memory, she will never hurt you again. Never." Ethan looked up, his large, round eyes red from crying, his lips still trembling. "You know about Miss Isabella?" His voice was tiny, as if afraid that speaking louder would make everything real. "You know she, I know everything, my little buddy," Vincent whispered, his throat tightening with pain. "I am sorry I was not here. I am sorry I did not know sooner." Nathan remained frozen, as if not yet daring to believe what was happening. "Do you promise?" the boy asked, his voice shaking. She said if we told you, she would send us away, to schools very far away, where you could never find us." Rage ignited inside Vincent's chest, but he forced it down. Now was not the time for anger. Now was the time for the gentleness these two children had been denied for far too long. "Look at me," he said, his voice solid as steel. "You are not broken. Do you hear me? You are not worthless. You are not a burden. You are my children, my flesh and blood, the only thing in this world that truly matters." He pulled both children into his arms, holding them tight as if afraid someone would tear them away from him. "And no one, do you hear me? No one in this world can take you from me. You belong to me. And no one takes what is mine." In his arms, the two small bodies trembled. Then Nathan cried. For the first time in 3 months, the boy allowed himself to truly cry, crying that was not muffled, not suppressed. Ethan cried along with him, sobs bursting forth like water breaking through a dam that had held back the flood for far too long. And Vincent held his children tight, making a promise to himself that even if he had to burn all of Boston to the ground, he would keep this vow. A knock on the door, soft as a breath, interrupted their moment of reunion. Grace slipped into the room like a ghost, her face tense under the pale moonlight. "The light in Isabella's bedroom just turned on," she said, her voice urgent but remarkably calm. She may have heard the scream. "We need to move, right now." Vincent stood up, one hand still on Nathan's shoulder, the other holding Ethan's tiny hand. "Where to?" "Isabella controls every way in and out of this house." "Not every way," Grace replied, a thin smile briefly crossing her lips. "Follow me." They left the bedroom, walking in silence. Grace stopped abruptly before a decorative wooden panel at the dead end of the service hallway. "Impossible," Vincent whispered, his voice tense. "My security team swept this penthouse before I moved in. Thermal scanners, sonar, they checked every inch. Your men were looking for heat signatures and electronic bugs, Vincent," Grace replied, her fingers tracing the edge of the molding. "They weren't looking for empty space." She pressed a sequence of carved flowers on the wood, not a button, but a mechanical latch hidden within the design. With a soft click, the wall didn't slide. It swung inward like a heavy vault door. "Prohibition era," she explained, her voice echoing slightly. "A smuggler's hideout lined with lead and concrete. Impervious to thermal scans. Invisible to sonar." Vincent stared into the darkness. How? How did you find it when my best men failed?" "I measured," Grace said simply, stepping into the void. "The hallway is 4 feet shorter on the inside than the blueprints say it should be on the outside. Mathematics doesn't lie." Vincent looked at her, really looked at her. He didn't ask why a housekeeper would measure the architectural dimensions of his home. He was beginning to understand that Grace Sullivan was far more dangerous and far more brilliant than he had ever imagined. They moved through the narrow hallway, dust thick on the walls but the floor clean, a sign that someone had been using this passage regularly. Nathan gripped his father's hand tightly. Ethan was carried in Vincent's arms, his head resting against his shoulder, as if he had finally found a safe place to rest. Grace stopped before an old door, its paint peeling and hinges rusted. But when she pushed it open, what lay inside made Vincent freeze in his tracks. This was not a forgotten room. This was a surveillance center. 3 computer monitors sat on a desk, displaying images from cameras placed throughout the penthouse. The living room, the dining room, the children's playroom, even the master bedroom where Isabella was now standing, her posture tense, her eyes fixed on the door as if listening for something. Beside the monitors was an open laptop, dozens of file folders visible on the screen. Stacks of documents were arranged neatly on shelves, each one carefully labeled with dates. and beneath the sheet draped over a single chair in the corner of the room, Vincent recognized the familiar shape of a Glock. "Insurance," Grace said, closing the door behind them. "Everything Isabella has done over the past 3 months. Every word, every action, every slap, and every threat. All of it recorded." Vincent set Ethan down on the chair. The little boy had fallen asleep from exhaustion. Nathan stood beside his brother, one hand resting on his shoulder, as if even in sleep, the boy never stopped protecting him. Vincent turned to Grace, looking at her with entirely different eyes, no longer the gaze of a master looking at a servant, but the gaze of a man trying to solve a dangerous puzzle. "You are not a housekeeper," he said. "Not a question, but a statement. Who are you really?" Grace did not answer immediately. She walked to the desk, her fingers brushing over the stacks of files as if touching painful memories. When she turned back, there was something in her eyes that Vincent recognized. Pain, the kind of pain that had transformed into a reason for living. "I am someone who made a promise to a woman who died," Grace replied, her voice dropping low. "Someone who has been waiting for you to come home early for the past 3 months, waiting for the moment you would see the truth with your own eyes." Vincent's heart clenched. "My wife? Elizabeth?" The name escaped him like both a prayer and a curse at once. Elizabeth, the woman he loved, the woman who had died in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving him with 2 children and a shattered heart. Grace shook her head, but it was not a complete denial. "Not exactly," she said, and in her voice there was a bitterness that Vincent could feel. "But your children are not the only ones Isabella Romano has destroyed. She took the most important person in my life, and I came here to make sure she pays for everything." Grace turned to the laptop, her fingers gliding across the keyboard with the fluency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. A folder opened, and on the screen appeared the photograph of a young woman. Vincent stared at the face in the picture, a feeling of familiarity creeping through his mind. The eyes in the photograph resembled Grace's, the same deep dark brown, but there was something different, softer, warmer, as if this woman looked at the world through the eyes of someone who believed in goodness, while Grace looked at the world through the eyes of someone who had lost that faith. "Rachel Sullivan," Grace said, her voice falling as she spoke the name. "My sister. She worked as an accountant for you 3 years ago. The downtown office. She handled the books for your legitimate businesses." Memories crashed over him like a wave. Vincent remembered. Rachel Sullivan. The young woman with the radiant smile and fingers that flew across the keyboard. She had worked for him for over a year, never asking questions that should not be asked, never curious about where the money came from. A perfect employee. Then one day, she stopped coming to the office. The news said she was killed in a robbery gone wrong. Wrong place, wrong time. Vincent had sent flowers to the funeral, a white wreath with words of condolence. He had even sent a sum of money to her family as a gesture of respect for a former employee. Then he continued with his life, continued with his work, continued to forget. "I remember," Vincent said, his voice growing heavy. "The robbery. I sent flowers." Grace turned back, and in her eyes blazed a fire that Vincent recognized instantly. It was the fire of hatred, of pain that had ripened into purpose. "It was not a robbery." Grace's voice was cold as steel tempered in ice. "The Romano family killed my sister. Marco Romano gave the order. His men carried it out." She paused, swallowing hard as if the next words were shards of glass cutting into her throat. "They tortured her first. For 2 days. They wanted information about your operations, about your money flows, about weaknesses they could exploit." The room seemed to shrink. The air grew so thick that Vincent found it hard to breathe. She did not say a word. Grace continued, her voice trembling but still resolute. 2 days of torture, and she never breathed a single syllable. Not because she was loyal to you, but because she knew that if the Romanos got that information, they would come for you. And if they came for you, they would find the 2 children. She died to protect Nathan and Ethan, 2 children she had never even met. Vincent felt his knees weaken. A woman he barely remembered had endured hell and death to protect his children, while he sent flowers and continued to forget. "You came here for revenge," he said. "Not a question." Grace placed her hand on the screen, her finger gently touching her sister's face in the photograph. "I came here to find the truth," she replied. "When I discovered who was behind my sister's death, I made a plan. I would infiltrate the life of Vincent Caruso, gather evidence, then destroy him." She turned back, looking straight into Vincent's eyes without a trace of fear. "I thought you were a monster. Thought you knew how my sister died and did nothing. Thought you deserved punishment just as much as the Romanos." Heavy silence hung between them. Vincent did not defend himself, did not deny. He waited. "But then I watched," Grace continued, her voice softening slightly. 3 months living in this house, I watched everything. I saw you looking at photographs of Elizabeth with pain that could not be faked. Saw you standing in her room for hours in the middle of the night, talking to someone who was no longer there. I saw your children waiting by the window every evening, eyes fixed on the street below, hoping their father would come home early today. And I saw Isabella systematically destroying them while you drowned in guilt, completely unaware of the hell unfolding under your own roof. She stepped closer to Vincent, only one step away from him. You are not a monster, Vincent Caruso. You are a broken man trying to survive, just like me. So what do you want now? Vincent asked, his voice hoarse. Grace looked toward the chair where Nathan was sitting, one hand still resting on the shoulder of his sleeping brother. Her eyes softened when she looked at the two children, and in that moment, Vincent saw the real Grace. Not an avenger, not a spy, but a woman who had lost the person she loved most and was trying to turn her pain into something meaningful. I want Isabella to pay for everything she has done, Grace replied, her voice solid as a vow. And I want to save the children my sister died to protect. That is the only thing left I can do for Rachel. Grace turned back to the laptop, opening more folders she had created over the past 3 months. Each file appeared on the screen like pieces of a horrifying puzzle that Vincent had never imagined. First were screenshots of the search history on Isabella's personal computer. 6 weeks ago, his beautiful fiancée had typed keywords into the search bar that no one with good intentions would ever need. Poison that leaves no trace. Substances that cause natural heart failure. How to make death look like heart disease. Dozens of search results. Dozens of medical websites and underground forums. All of them meticulously researched by Isabella as if she were preparing for an important exam. Grace clicked to the next file. 4 weeks ago, a secretly taken photograph of Isabella stepping out of an estate lawyer's office in the Beacon Hill district. Beside it was a copy of documents that Grace had somehow obtained. A new will for Vincent Caruso, amended so that Isabella Romano would become the sole heir in the event that he and his children died. Vincent's signature at the bottom of the page, perfect down to every stroke. A forgery indistinguishable from the real thing. She forged my signature, Vincent whispered, his voice catching in his throat. She has prepared everything, Grace replied, continuing to open another file. 2 weeks ago, photographs taken at an upscale restaurant in the Boston suburbs. Isabella sat across from 2 men that Vincent recognized immediately. Enzo and Sal, 2 notorious assassins of the Romano family. Men that Marco Romano only summoned when problems needed to be solved permanently. In the photograph, Isabella was smiling, raising a glass of wine as if celebrating something. Perhaps she was celebrating the upcoming deaths of him and his children. Then the final file. Yesterday, video from a security camera that Grace had installed in Isabella's bedroom. The footage showed a delivery man arriving at the door, handing Isabella a small box wrapped in brown paper. When Isabella opened the box in her private room, the camera clearly recorded what was inside. A vial of clear, unlabeled liquid, a set of medical syringes, and a small piece of paper with handwritten text that Isabella read and then burned in an ashtray. Digitalis, Grace explained, her voice cold as if reading a scientific report, extracted from the foxglove plant, used in medicine to treat heart conditions in controlled doses. But in the hands of someone with malicious intent, it becomes the perfect weapon. She paused, looking at Vincent with eyes heavy with weight. Small doses cause symptoms that resemble stress, fatigue, nausea, irregular heartbeat. Doctors would think it was from work pressure, from tension, from lack of sleep. Larger doses would cause cardiac arrest, and by the time anyone suspected enough to request an autopsy, the poison would have completely degraded, no trace left behind. Vincent felt his stomach rising into his throat. He had faced death many times in his life, had stared down the barrel of a gun without blinking, had ordered men killed without hesitation. But never, not once, had he felt this nauseated. She was planning to kill us, he said, and the words came out like the whisper of a man who had just received a death sentence. Grace nodded. The children first. A tragic accident would take the lives of Nathan and Ethan. Perhaps a fall down the stairs, perhaps food poisoning, perhaps drowning in the bathtub. Isabella would weep and grieve in front of everyone, and no one would suspect the stepmother devastated by the loss of her children. Her voice was bitter as venom. Then you, slowly. The stress of losing your children would be the perfect explanation for the unusual symptoms. Heart failure from excessive grief. The tragic death of a father who could not overcome the pain of losing his children. Perfect. Why? Vincent asked, though he was beginning to understand. What would she gain from this? Grace closed the laptop, turning to face him. Everything. Your entire inherited fortune. The empire you built over 15 years. The business relationships, the shipping routes, the legal and illegal investments. She paused, letting each word sink in. And her father, Marco Romano, would absorb your empire without firing a single shot. No war, no bloodshed, just a funeral and a forged will. Vincent looked toward his 2 children sitting in the corner of the room. Nathan was still awake, his eyes wide open in the darkness. Listening to everything, though he did not understand it all. Ethan had fallen asleep with his head on his brother's shoulder, carefree in the sleep of childhood. These 2 small souls, his flesh and blood, had been marked for death by the woman he was about to marry. When? He asked, his voice low like the growl of a predator. When was she planning to strike? Grace looked at the clock on the wall. Tomorrow night. The documents are ready. The children will no longer be a problem. You heard that call. We have less than 24 hours. Vincent stood in the middle of the secret room, the pale blue light from the computer screens casting strange shadows across his face. His eyes were fixed on the corner where Nathan sat, his back against the wall, Ethan's head resting on his shoulder. Both had fallen asleep from exhaustion. Their young faces finally relaxed in slumber after hours of tension. In their dreams, perhaps they did not have to be afraid. In their dreams, perhaps they were still normal children with a normal life. Vincent knew he had 2 choices. The first choice was war. Call his men, mobilize his forces, and confront the Romano family head-on. He had enough firepower, enough loyal soldiers, enough connections to turn Boston into a battlefield. But war meant blood, meant death, meant stray bullets and explosions that did not distinguish between adults and children. And his children, the 2 sleeping there, would be caught right in the middle of that war. The second choice was to run, leave Boston behind, leave behind the empire he had built over 15 years with sweat, tears, and blood, leave behind the identity of Vincent Caruso, the name that made people tremble, the name that carried power and respect, become nobody, a ghost vanishing into the night. Grace watched him in silence, letting him wrestle with the thoughts in his head. Then she spoke, her voice gentle but certain. I have already prepared everything, she said. A car is waiting in the abandoned parking garage on level 3. Enough cash to live comfortably for several years. False identities for all 4 of us. And a safe place that no one, not even the Romanos, can find. Vincent turned to look at her, his eyes narrowing. You planned an escape for me? Since when? I plan for every possibility, Grace replied, unflinching under his scrutinizing gaze, including the possibility that you are a good father trapped in a bad world, just as my sister believed. She paused, her eyes softening as she looked toward the 2 sleeping children. Rachel told me about you. About how you called your children every night, no matter where you were. About the family photograph you always kept on your desk. She believed you did not belong in this world. And I prepared for the chance that she was right. Vincent looked down at his hands. The Beretta still rested there, its handle familiar as a part of his own body. This weapon had solved all of his problems for the past 15 years. An enemy wanted him dead? The Beretta solved it. A partner planned to betray him? The Beretta solved it. Someone threatened what belonged to him? The Beretta always had the answer. It was the only language he knew how to speak in this world. The language of violence. The language of power. Then he looked at Nathan and Ethan. 2 small figures curled into each other in sleep, seeking warmth and safety from one another because they could not find it from adults. Nathan's closed eyes still showed traces of sleepless nights. Ethan's cheeks still bore the streaks of dried tears. These 2 children were all that remained of Elizabeth, were all that mattered in this world. If I run, Vincent said, his voice dropping to a whisper, I lose everything. The empire, the power, everything I have built. Grace stepped closer, standing directly in front of him. If you stay, she replied, her voice without a moment of hesitation, you lose them. 2 choices, 1 decision. And Vincent Caruso, the man who had never hesitated before any life or death decision, for the first time in his life felt his hands trembling. He looked at the Beretta one last time. The cold weapon gleamed under the light of the screens, like a reminder of the man he had been, of what he had done, of the blood on his hands that would never wash clean. Then Vincent did something he had never done in 15 years. He removed the gun from his body and placed it on the table with a soft sound. Metal, touching wood, power touching surrender. He pulled his hand back, leaving the Beretta lying there like a piece of the past he was abandoning. We go, he said, his voice solid as steel. Right now, 3:47 in the morning. The clock on the wall ticked each second like a countdown to the end of the world. Grace woke the children gently, soft whispers pulling them from their brief sleep. Nathan opened his eyes immediately, his ingrained instinct for alertness, meaning he needed no time to become fully awake. Ethan took a few seconds longer, his small eyes opening with confusion before he recognized his father standing beside him. "We have to go now," Vincent said to the children, his voice gentle but unable to hide the urgency. "No making any noise. Do everything Miss Grace tells you. Understand?" Nathan nodded without a word of protest. Ethan only looked up at his father and reached his arms up to be carried. Vincent lifted him, his arms holding his small body tight against his chest. Ethan wrapped his arms around his neck, his head resting on his shoulder as if it were the safest place in the world. And Vincent swore he would make that true. Grace led the way through the secret corridor, her footsteps making no sound. Nathan held her hand tightly, his small fingers wrapped around the hand of the woman he had called the housekeeper just hours before. They moved through narrow passages and spiral staircases that Vincent had never known existed, descending deep into the building until they reached a heavy steel door. Grace entered a code on the keypad. The door opened with a soft click, and they stepped into an abandoned parking garage that Vincent had no idea existed right beneath his feet. The car waiting in the corner of the garage was not Vincent's gleaming black Maserati, not the Bentley or Range Rover he usually drove. It was an old Honda Civic, its silver paint faded, a few dents on the front bumper. The kind of car people see hundreds of times a day and never remember. The perfect car for disappearing. Grace sat in the driver's seat. Vincent placed Ethan in the back seat, then sat beside his son. Nathan climbed in on the other side, immediately pressing close to his brother. The engine started with a soft hum, and the car rolled out of the garage through an exit that Vincent had never known existed. They drove through Boston in the night. Familiar streets drifted past the windows, buildings that Vincent owned, restaurants where he had once negotiated million-dollar deals, street corners where he had built his empire from nothing. The city lights flickered in the rearview mirror, and with each mile they traveled, the past receded further. Vincent Caruso was dying, not by bullet or blade, but by choice. He was burying with his own hands the man he had been for 15 years. 30 minutes after they left the penthouse, the phone in Vincent's pocket vibrated. He pulled it out, the screen glowing in the darkness of the car with a familiar name. Isabella. He looked at that name for several seconds, thinking of her smile, thinking of the sweet words she had once spoken, thinking of how she had made his son kneel and call himself worthless. Then he pressed decline, powered off the phone, removed the SIM card and threw it through the half-lowered window. The small piece of plastic vanished into the night, carrying with it the last thread connecting him to his old life. They were on the highway, heading north, when Grace glanced into the rearview mirror, her eyes suddenly sharpening. "We have a tail," she said, her voice strangely calm. Vincent turned to look behind them. 2 black SUVs were following, their headlights blazing in the night, the distance shrinking. He recognized the type. The black Escalades that Romano's men favored. "How did they find us?" Vincent asked, his hand instinctively reaching for his hip where the Beretta usually sat, then remembering he had left it behind in the secret room. "Isabella certainly put trackers in your car, in your phone, possibly even in your clothes," Grace replied, her eyes never leaving the rearview mirror. "But they are tracking the devices, not tracking us. They did not expect us to switch cars." Grace pressed the accelerator, and the aging Civic roared as if being awakened from a long sleep. She turned right sharply, plunging into a narrow road between 2 warehouse buildings. Another left turn, another right. She drove like someone who had studied every road, every alley, every shortcut in this city, like someone trained for this exact moment. In the back seat, Nathan held his brother tight, his small body shielding Ethan like a human shield. He did not cry, did not scream, only held him and closed his eyes, his lips moving in what might have been a prayer. Ethan covered his ears with his tiny hands, eyes squeezed shut, trying to block out the world outside. Grace hit the brakes, turned into an underground parking lot, killed the lights, and stopped in the darkness. The 2 SUVs roared past outside, their headlights sweeping across but not detecting the Civic hiding in the shadows. The sound of their engines faded and then vanished. They waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes. No one spoke. Only the sound of 4 people breathing in the cramped space of the car, and the sound of hearts pounding as if they would burst from their chests. Then Grace started the car again, drove out of the parking lot, and headed north, toward Oregon, toward freedom. Vincent looked out the window as Boston slowly disappeared behind them. His empire, his power, the man he once was, all of it receding with every mile, and he did not look back once. 5:30 in the morning, the eastern sky began to shift from black to gray, heralding the arrival of a new day. Grace stopped the car in front of a small house in the suburbs of Medford. A one-story home with an old tile roof and a lawn that needed mowing. Unremarkable to the point of being invisible. That was exactly what they needed. The house sat among dozens of identical homes on a quiet street, where neighbors left for work early in the morning and returned late, where no one cared about who lived next door. Grace led them inside through the back door, a key hidden under a withered flower pot as if it had been waiting there for a long time. Inside the house, Vincent looked around and understood that Grace had been preparing for this moment for weeks, perhaps months. The refrigerator was full of fresh food, items recently stocked based on the expiration dates. The closet had clothes in sizes for both adults and children. On a small desk sat a stack of documents, new identification papers, fake birth certificates, and a laptop already set up. She had planned for everything, including the possibility that he was not the monster she had imagined. The children stood in the middle of the living room, their eyes wide but empty with exhaustion. They had been awake all night, had fled through dark corridors, had heard the roar of engines during the chase. Their bodies were screaming for rest, but the fear was still too great to allow sleep to come. Ethan stood clinging to his father's leg, his tiny fingers gripping the fabric of Vincent's pants, as if afraid he would vanish if he let go. He looked up, his large round eyes still red from crying, his lips trembling as he asked a question that Vincent knew would haunt him forever. "Will Miss Isabella find us?" Vincent knelt down, placing himself at eye level with his son. He saw the fear in those eyes. The fear of a 5-year-old child who had been taught that monsters did not live under the bed but lived right inside the house, wearing pretty dresses and high heels. "No one will find us here," he said in the gentlest voice he could manage. "I promise. We are safe now." Ethan looked at him, and in his eyes Vincent saw the same question Nathan had asked him the night before. The same doubt, the same fear of trusting and being betrayed. "You promise?" he asked again, as if needing to hear it once more to believe. "I promise." Vincent pulled him into his arms and held him tight. "I will not let anyone hurt you anymore. No one." He led the children to a small bedroom at the end of the hallway, where 2 single beds had been prepared with clean sheets and pillows. Nathan and Ethan lay down, but their eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for something terrible to happen. Vincent sat down beside the bed, his hand gently stroking Ethan's hair. And then, from somewhere he could not name, an old melody returned to his memory. The song that Elizabeth used to sing to the children every night. The song he thought he had forgotten long ago, buried with the pain of losing his wife. But tonight, in this strange safe house, the words found their way back. He began to sing, his voice hoarse and not as smooth as Elizabeth's, but the melody was right. Ethan closed his eyes almost immediately, as if the song were the key that opened the door to sleep he had been forbidden to enter for far too long. Nathan relaxed as well, his shoulders lowering, his clenched fists slowly uncurling. When Vincent thought both children had fallen asleep, Nathan suddenly spoke, his voice small as a breath in the darkness. "Papa." The boy opened his eyes, looking at his father with guilt-filled eyes. "I am sorry. I am sorry I did not tell you about Miss Isabella. I was scared. I thought if I told, she would send us away and you would never find us. I am sorry." Vincent felt his heart seize. His son, 7 years old, was apologizing for not being able to save himself, was carrying guilt for what the adults had failed to do. "You have nothing to apologize for," Vincent said, his voice trembling. He took his son's small hand and held it tight. "Listen to me. Nothing in this is your fault. Nothing." He paused, swallowing down the pain rising in his throat. "I am the one who should apologize. I was not here. I did not see. I left you alone with her. That is my fault. Only mine." Nathan looked at his father for several seconds, then nodded softly. And for the first time in many months, the boy allowed himself to close his eyes without fear. When both children had sunk into sleep, Vincent remained sitting there, watching them in the faint light of dawn peeking through the curtains. These 2 small souls had endured hell in silence, had learned to survive by trusting no one, had carried invisible scars that might never fully heal. And he, their father, had known nothing. Night fell over Medford in silence. The small house sank into darkness except for the weak yellow light from the kitchen, where Vincent and Grace sat facing each other at the old wooden table. 2 cups of coffee had gone cold between them, neither bothering to take another sip. The children were sleeping soundly in the next room, the first sleep in many months not haunted by the ghost of Isabella. The silence stretched on but was not heavy. It was the silence of people who had grown tired of words, who had been through too much in one night to have the strength for small talk. Vincent looked down at his coffee cup, his fingers unconsciously spinning it on the table. Grace sat across from him, her eyes gazing out the window where the night was pitch black without a single star. She believed in people. Grace suddenly spoke, her voice soft as a breath in the quiet night. "Rachel, even while working in your world, she still saw light. She told me about you, about how you treated your employees, about how you talked to your children on the phone every night." Grace paused, her gaze still fixed on somewhere far away. "She said you were not like the others in that world. You had something they did not have." Vincent looked up, his tired eyes meeting Grace's gaze. "What?" A faint smile crossed Grace's lips, a sad smile mixed with nostalgia. She called it a crack. She said people like you, people who have lived in darkness for too long, they usually become hard as stone. But you had a crack, where light could get in, where your true self was still alive. She turned to look at Vincent. I did not believe her. I thought she was naive. But tonight, when I saw you kneel before your children, when I heard you sing them a lullaby, I understood what she meant. Vincent said nothing for a long while. He thought about Rachel, the young woman with the gentle smile whom he barely remembered. She had died to protect his children, and he had not even known until tonight. Elizabeth saw it too. He finally spoke, his voice dropping to a whisper. She saw that crack and she tried to pull me out. Every day. He paused, memories of his wife rushing back like the tide. She wanted me out of this life, to leave Boston behind, to leave everything. We had a plan. Sell everything, move to Montana, buy a small ranch somewhere no one knew what the name Caruso meant. Live normally, raise the children, grow old together. Grace looked at him, waiting. "What happened?" she asked gently. Vincent closed his eyes, the old pain rising as if it had never faded. "She died before I could follow through. A car accident. At least, that is what I thought until now." He opened his eyes, looking down at his hands that had done so many terrible things. "And I sank deeper instead of climbing out. I thought if I built an empire large enough, strong enough, I could protect my children. I thought power was the only way to keep them safe." A bitter laugh escaped his throat. "But while I was building my empire, I abandoned the very people I wanted to protect." Silence returned, but this time it carried the weight of the words just spoken. Two people sitting in the small kitchen of a safe house. Two souls shattered by different losses but sharing the same pain. Grace had lost her sister. Vincent had lost his wife. Both were trying to find meaning in tragedy, trying to turn grief into something not entirely meaningless. No one said another word. There was no need. In the darkness of the small kitchen, with the cold coffee between them, Vincent and Grace simply sat there. No need to fill the emptiness with hollow words of comfort. No need to pretend that everything would be all right. Then their eyes met. Not a look of passion or desire. Not the gaze of two people seeking comfort in each other's arms. This was a look of understanding. Of two people who had touched the bottom of pain and realized they were not alone. Grace saw in Vincent's eyes the guilt of a father who had failed. Vincent saw in Grace's eyes the loneliness of a sister who had lost half of her soul. There was no kiss, no hands touching, only two gazes meeting in the darkness and understanding. Understanding the pain, understanding the loss, understanding why they were here, in this small house, in the cold Medford night. And sometimes, that understanding is more intimate than any touch. The next morning, Medford sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, waking Vincent from his restless sleep on the old sofa. He had not dared to sleep in a bed, had not dared to move more than a few steps from the children's door. His body ached from sleeping upright, but it was a pain he was willing to endure. Grace had been awake since earlier, preparing breakfast in the kitchen with gentle movements so as not to wake the children. Vincent stood up, stretching his muscles, and faced a truth he had been avoiding all night. He could not fight alone, could not run forever. Isabella and Marco Romano had resources, had people, had the power of an entire criminal empire. Sooner or later, they would find him. And when that happened, no safe house could protect Nathan and Ethan. He needed help. From someone who could stand against the Romanos without being crushed. From someone he trusted in the legitimate world. Vincent picked up the burner phone Grace had prepared and dialed a number he had memorized 20 years ago. The number for Daniel Hayes. They had grown up together on the south side of Boston. Two poor kids dreaming of escaping the dirty streets. Then life took them in two different directions. Vincent chose darkness, building an empire from blood and money. Daniel chose light, becoming an FBI agent who spent his life hunting people like Vincent. But between them remained a strange thread, a friendship from childhood that neither side could completely sever. They did not speak often, but when needed, they knew the other would answer. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. Vincent Caruso calling me at 7 in the morning. Daniel's voice came through, hoarse from just waking but still sharp. Is someone dead or about to die? My children, Vincent replied, his voice heavy. If I do not act. Silence on the other end. Then the sound of Daniel sighing. Tell me. And Vincent told him. Everything. From the moment he came home early last night, to the scene of Isabella making Ethan kneel and call himself worthless, from the videos Grace had recorded, to the phone call about documents and the children will no longer be a problem. From the plan to poison with digitalis, to the truth about Rachel Sullivan's death, he told it without hiding, without justifying, without trying to make himself look better than reality. He spoke like a man standing at the edge of an abyss with nothing left to lose. Daniel listened without interrupting. That was something Vincent had always respected about his friend. Daniel knew when to stay silent and when to speak. When Vincent finished, silence stretched for several seconds. Then Daniel spoke, his voice serious. The FBI has been watching Romano for 5 years, Vincent. Marco Romano is at the top of our target list. But the old man is careful, leaves no traces. We know what he does, but we do not have evidence strong enough to bring to court. Daniel paused. We need evidence. I have evidence, Vincent replied immediately. Video of Isabella abusing my children. Documents about the poisoning plan. Search history. Call recordings. Photos of her meeting with Romano's assassins. Enough to bury the entire family. How did you obtain these things? Daniel asked, his voice cautious. Grace Sullivan. Rachel Sullivan's sister. She has been watching Isabella for 3 months, collecting everything. Vincent knew what the next question would be. And before you ask, I did not know she was doing it until last night. Daniel sighed again, the heavy breath of someone weighing difficult choices. You know what this means, right, Vincent? If you want the FBI to act, you will have to testify. Before a federal grand jury. Against Romano. He paused, letting each word sink in. And against yourself. I know. You will lose everything. The empire you built over 15 years. The identity of Vincent Caruso. Your old life. All of it will disappear. You will become nobody. Vincent looked toward the bedroom where Nathan and Ethan were still sleeping. 2 children who had endured hell because of his absence. 2 children he had sworn to protect at any cost. I already lost everything that mattered once, Daniel, he said, his voice low but unwavering. When Elizabeth died, I thought that was rock bottom. But I was wrong. Rock bottom is when my son kneels down and calls himself worthless. Rock bottom is when my son sees his father but does not dare run to him because he has learned to be afraid. He drew a deep breath. I will not lose again. No matter what it costs. Silence stretched on the other end. Then Daniel spoke, his voice softening slightly. I will be in Medford this afternoon. And Vincent? Do not go anywhere. Daniel Hayes arrived at the safe house at 3 in the afternoon, just as promised. He drove a gray sedan with nothing distinctive about it, the kind of car federal agents use when they do not want to be noticed. Vincent stood behind the curtain watching his friend step out of the car, a black leather briefcase in hand, and eyes quickly scanning the street before approaching the door. Daniel Hayes was 40 years old, but his hair had gone gray years earlier from the pressure of the job. He was slightly taller than Vincent, lean but solid, with sharp eyes trained to see through lies. 20 years in the FBI had transformed him from a poor kid on the South Side into one of the agency's best agents. Vincent opened the door for his friend to enter. The 2 men looked at each other for a long moment, too many years and too many different paths lying between them. Then Daniel nodded and stepped inside. Where are the children? He asked, his eyes scanning the room. In the bedroom, watching cartoons. Grace is with them. Daniel set his briefcase on the kitchen table, opened it, and took out a laptop and a stack of documents. I have given a preliminary report to my superiors. They are very interested in what you have on Romano. He sat down, opened the laptop, and began setting up. But Vincent, you need to understand clearly what is about to happen. Grace stepped out from the bedroom, closing the door gently behind her. She sat down beside Vincent, waiting in silence. Daniel looked at both of them, then began to explain. This is the deal, Daniel said, leaning forward, his expression grave. Grace's evidence is a goldmine, but it's complex. We need 48 hours to verify the data and secure federal warrants for a RICO indictment. We are planning a synchronized raid on Friday night. Vincent narrowed his eyes. And us? You stay put, Daniel replied firmly. If I pull you into federal custody today, Romano's moles inside the bureau will tip him off. He'll shred the documents and vanish before we can execute the warrants. We need him to think you are still running, still scared, still hiding. You want us to be bait, Vincent said, his voice cold. I want you to be ghosts, Daniel corrected. We keep a loose perimeter, low profile. Friday night, the moment we have Romano in handcuffs, a tactical team extracts you and the children. But until that clock hits 0, you don't move. You don't breathe. Daniel glanced at Grace. Along with immunity from prosecution for Miss Sullivan regarding any actions related to gathering evidence, Vincent turned to look at Grace, then back at Daniel. Grace will be protected? Daniel was silent for a moment, his eyes drifting to the woman sitting beside Vincent. She never asked for protection for herself, he replied, his voice carrying something like reluctant respect. When I contacted her to verify information about her, the only thing she requested was assurance that the evidence would be used to bring Isabella Romano to justice. Vincent turned to Grace, his eyes searching for answers on her face. You will come with us, he said. Not a question, but a statement. Grace shook her head slightly. That was not my plan, Vincent. My plan was to ensure Isabella pays for what she did to my sister, to your children. When that is done, my mission ends. What is your plan? Vincent asked, his voice carrying a slight edge. Disappear after Isabella is arrested? Return to your old life as if the past 3 months never happened? Live alone with your sister's ghost for the rest of your life? Grace did not answer. She looked down at the table, her fingers intertwined, and Vincent could see the hesitation in her eyes. This was a woman who had spent 3 months watching, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. She had planned for everything except where she herself would go when it was all over. Before anyone could say more, the bedroom door opened. Nathan stood in the doorway, his large round eyes looking at the adults with worry. The boy had heard. Vincent realized immediately. Not everything, perhaps, but enough to understand something important. Miss Grace will not come with us? Nathan asked, his voice trembling. Ethan appeared right behind his brother, his eyes red as if he had just been crying. Without a word, he ran straight to Grace, his tiny arms wrapping tightly around the woman's legs, as if afraid she would vanish. I do not want you to go, Ethan said, his voice choked. You are a good person. You saved us. You have to stay with us. Grace stood motionless, her eyes looking down at the child clinging to her legs. The child who less than 2 days ago had knelt on the carpet and called himself worthless. The child her sister had died to protect. Now that child was holding her as if she were family, as if her departure would be a loss too great to bear. Nathan stepped closer, standing beside his brother. Miss Grace stayed with us when Miss Isabella did those terrible things, the boy said, his voice steadier than any 7-year-old should have. You did not leave then. Why do you want to leave now? Grace knelt down, one hand on Nathan's shoulder, the other stroking Ethan's hair. She looked at the 2 children, the children she had secretly protected for 3 months, and Vincent saw something change in her eyes. The wall she had built was beginning to crack. She began, then stopped. She looked up at Vincent, looked at Daniel, then looked back at the 2 children waiting for an answer as if their lives depended on it. I will think about it. Not a promise, but not a refusal either. And in that moment, Vincent knew that whether Grace admitted it or not, she had long ceased to be an outsider in this story. 48 hours. The time passed not in minutes, but in heartbeats. It was a silent countdown. Daniel had ordered total radio silence to avoid interception. Inside the small house, the air was thick with the tension of a bomb waiting to detonate. They weren't just waiting for a new life. They were waiting for the hammer to fall on the Romano Empire, praying that the enemy wouldn't find them before the FBI strike team did. The children began to laugh more often, began to sleep without nightmares every night. Grace still had not given an official answer, but she no longer mentioned leaving. And Vincent, for the first time in many years, felt something like hope. But in Boston, a storm was forming. Isabella Romano stood in the middle of the penthouse that once belonged to Vincent, now a battlefield of shattered furniture and broken glass. She had just smashed an antique vase worth $100,000, the sound of glass breaking echoing like her own screams. The perfect face that once captivated Vincent was now twisted with rage, her manic eyes sweeping across the room, searching for something else to destroy. He disappeared. Isabella screamed, grabbing a table lamp and hurling it straight at the wall. 2 days. 2 days, and no one can find him. Marco Romano stood in the corner of the room, silently watching his daughter with eyes cold as ice. He was 62 years old, his white hair slicked back, his weathered face revealing not a trace of emotion. This was the man who had built the Romano Empire from nothing, who had ordered dozens of men killed without blinking, who had arranged Elizabeth Caruso's death as if it were merely a business transaction. You let him escape. Marco finally spoke, his voice low and steady as the sound of a guillotine. You let an empire worth billions of dollars escape, All you had to do was keep him happy until the plan was complete. Something that simple and you could not even do it. Isabella turned around, her eyes blazing. Do not blame me. Someone betrayed us. Someone told him. I did everything exactly according to plan. Everything according to plan? Marco moved closer, each step slow and full of menace. The plan did not include Vincent Caruso and his 2 children vanishing in the middle of the night. The plan did not include us losing the most important leverage to take over Boston. Isabella stepped back, but her eyes showed no submission. I will find him. Enzo and Sal have captured Tony Russo, one of Vincent's old subordinates. He knows some places where Vincent might be hiding. A vicious smile spread across her lips. And after they finish with Tony, I will have answers. Marco looked at his daughter for a long moment, then nodded. Find him, and this time, do not let him escape. I will find him, Isabella replied, her voice becoming cold and focused. And I will kill him. Kill both of his brat children, too. No one is allowed to humiliate Isabella Romano and live to tell the tale. In the basement of an abandoned warehouse on the south side, Tony Russo was screaming. Enzo and Sal had been working on him for the past 12 hours. And finally, amid blood and tears, he had remembered a detail. Medford. He had once heard Vincent mention a safe house in Medford, prepared for emergencies. He did not know the exact address, but he remembered the area. Western suburbs. Near a small park. That was all Isabella needed. In the safe house, Grace stood by the window, as she did every hour, her eyes scanning the quiet street outside. It was a habit that 3 months of working as a spy had drilled into her bones, and that very habit saved all of their lives. She noticed it immediately. A car parked at the end of the street, engine still running, a figure moving in the bushes across the way. A plumbing repair van parked too long at the intersection. Though there was no construction in the area, Grace turned around, her face pale. They found us, she said to Vincent, her voice strangely calm. At least 3 surveillance points. They are waiting for something, possibly reinforcements. We have a few hours at most. Vincent did not ask how she was certain. He trusted Grace. He immediately called Daniel. They found us. We need to move now. Daniel swore on the other end of the line. I will have people there in 30 minutes. Be ready. 30 minutes. Vincent looked at the clock. 30 minutes could be a lifetime. They began packing quickly. Grace woke the children, dressed them, told them to stay quiet. Nathan understood immediately, his eyes once again aging beyond his years. Ethan clung to his brother's hand, asking no questions. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Vincent stood behind the curtain, watching the street outside. Everything remained quiet. Perhaps they would make it in time. Perhaps Daniel would arrive before the Romanos struck. Then headlights shone directly into the house. 3 black SUVs turned onto the street, their engines roaring in the night. They stopped in front of the house in tactical formation, blocking every escape route. The doors opened, and figures poured out with weapons in hand. And stepping down from the first vehicle was Isabella Romano. She wore a black dress, her hair pinned up, looking as if she were going to a party rather than to kill. But the gun in her hand was not for decoration, and her eyes, when she looked toward the house, blazed with the madness of someone who had crossed the final boundary of sanity. Vincent! Isabella's voice rang out in the night, sweet and venomous. Come out, darling. We have something to discuss. The front door burst open with a thunderous crash. Isabella stormed in like a tempest, the gun in her hand aimed straight at Grace and the children standing in the corner of the living room. Behind her, 2 Romano assassins flooded in, weapons ready, eyes sweeping the room for threats. Isabella looked like an angel of death in her form-fitting black dress, her eyes blazing with a madness Vincent had never seen in all their time together. Do not move, Isabella screamed, her gun trained on Grace. Anyone moves, I shoot! Grace stood before the children like a shield of flesh and bone, her hands pushing Nathan and Ethan behind her, covering them with her body. Nathan held his brother tight, his eyes wide with terror, but not a single tear falling. Ethan buried his face in his brother's chest, his small sobs muffled by the fabric of his shirt. Vincent stepped out from the kitchen doorway, both hands raised high, completely unarmed. He had left the Beretta in the secret room in Boston, and now he faced his deranged fiancée with nothing but his bare hands. He walked slowly, placing himself between Isabella and those he wanted to protect. Isabella, he said, his voice surprisingly calm given the circumstances. This is between you and me. Let them go. They have nothing to do with what is between us. Isabella laughed, but it was not the laugh Vincent had heard at elegant parties or the nights they lay beside each other. It was a shattered laugh, the laugh of someone standing on the edge of madness and no longer caring which way she would fall. "Between you and me," she repeated, her voice dripping with bitter sarcasm. "No, Vincent. This is not between you and me. This is between you and my family. Between you and everything you have taken from us. Between you and all the years my father spent building this plan." "I took nothing from the Romanos," Vincent replied, his voice still steady. "I only lived my life, built my empire. I never attacked your family." Isabella took another step forward, the gun trembling in her hand but still aimed at Vincent. "You took my future," she screamed, her voice breaking like glass. "I was born to become the Queen of Boston. That was my destiny. That was the reason I exist. And you?" She laughed bitterly. "You were just a tool. A puppet my father intended to use to take over everything. But you could not even play that role properly. You did not even know how to love me the right way." "Love you?" Vincent asked, without a trace of wavering. "Do you even know what love is, Isabella? Or do you only know what possession is?" Isabella pointed the gun straight at his face. "Do not lecture me about love. You love a woman who is dead. You love 2 children you never had time for. Is that your love?" Grace spoke up from behind Vincent, her voice strangely calm in this situation. "Isabella, the FBI is on the way. Daniel Hayes, the federal agent in charge of this case, raised the alarm 10 minutes before you arrived. They will be here in a few minutes." She paused, letting each word sink in. "You can kill us, but you will not escape. Not this time." Isabella swung the gun toward Grace, her eyes burning with hatred. "You think I care? You think I am afraid of the FBI? You think I am afraid to die?" She laughed, her manic laughter echoing through the small room. "I am not afraid of anything. There is nothing left to lose." Vincent took another step toward Isabella, slowly, without threat. "You are not afraid to die," he said, his voice dropping low. "I know. I can see it in your eyes. But there is something you are afraid of, Isabella. Something that has haunted you since you were a child." Isabella stepped back, the gun still pointed at Vincent, but no longer as steady as before. "You know nothing about me. I know you fear failure," Vincent continued, each word like a scalpel cutting into her soul. "Fear of not being good enough. Fear of your father looking at you like you are worthless. The way he looked at you in the penthouse tonight. Am I right? When he blamed you for letting me escape?" Isabella trembled. The gun in her hand trembled with her. "You did everything he asked," Vincent said, his voice softening slightly. "You pretended to love me. You tormented my children to turn them into controllable creatures. You planned to kill my entire family to inherit everything. All just so your father would look at you with pride once in your life." He paused, looking straight into Isabella's manic eyes. "But he was never proud of you, was he? Never. No matter what you did. Because to Marco Romano, you were just a tool. The same way you called me a tool. You have been terrified your entire life of being your father's puppet and dying without ever being seen as a real person." Tears began to roll down Isabella's cheeks, mixing with her perfect makeup, leaving long black streaks. The gun in her hand lowered slightly, then rose again, as if she were fighting against herself. "Be quiet," she whispered, her voice shattering. "Be quiet. You do not understand anything." But Vincent knew he had touched the wound, and he also knew that in the next few seconds, everything could change in any direction. Isabella laughed bitterly, the sound breaking from her throat like a strangled sob. "You think you understand me? You think a few cheap psychological observations are enough to see through me?" She shook her head, tears still flowing but the twisted smile still on her lips. "You understand nothing, Vincent. You do not understand 1% of what I have been through." Vincent stood still, neither retreating nor advancing. "Then let me understand," he said, his voice gentler than before. "If I am about to die by your hand, at least let me understand why." Isabella looked at him for a long time, her eyes red from crying but still burning with something Vincent could not read. Then she lowered the gun slightly. Not in surrender, not in letting go, but with the exhaustion of someone who had carried too many secrets for too long. "Elizabeth," she said, the name escaping like a sigh. Vincent froze. His wife's name rang through the room like a death knell. He knew, with the instinct of someone who had lived in darkness for too long, that what Isabella was about to say would change everything. "Your wife," Isabella continued, her voice becoming strangely calm. "Elizabeth Caruso, the woman you loved more than anything in this world, the woman you looked at with eyes you never gave to me. Do not speak of her," Vincent said, his voice taut as a wire. "You need to hear this." Isabella drew a deep breath, as if preparing for a leap into the abyss. "Elizabeth's death was not a car accident, Vincent. It was never an accident. The world stopped. Vincent felt as if someone had just sucked all the air from his lungs. "What did you say?" "My father arranged everything," Isabella said, each word clear and slow as if reading a death sentence. The brakes were cut, a dangerous curve, bad weather, all calculated perfectly. A tragic accident that no one would suspect. A poor widow leaving behind 2 small children and a shattered husband. Vincent stepped back, his legs seeming to lose their strength. Elizabeth, his wife, the woman he loved, not an accident, murdered, killed by the Romano family while he wept beside her coffin and knew nothing. "Why?" he asked, his voice now only a whisper of pain. "Why did he do it?" Isabella looked at him, and in her eyes, Vincent saw something like pity. "Because she wanted you out of this life. Because she was the only barrier preventing my father from absorbing your empire. Elizabeth wanted you to sell everything, move to Montana, live a normal life. She almost convinced you." Isabella laughed bitterly. "My father could not let that happen. You were too valuable. Your empire too rich." So he eliminated the obstacle. Vincent felt his stomach turn. Elizabeth had died because she loved him. Because she wanted to save him from the darkness. And he had failed to protect her. "And I," Isabella continued, her voice choking, "I was designed to replace her. From beginning to end, I was just a chess piece in my father's game. A reward for you in exchange for your obedience. A beautiful puppet to keep you happy while my father slowly swallowed everything you built." "You knew from the beginning?" Vincent asked, his voice shaking from the effort to contain the rage burning inside. Isabella shook her head, and for the first time, Vincent saw her truly cry. Not calculated tears meant to manipulate, not a performance to achieve something. These were the tears of a shattered soul, flowing beyond control. "I found out after I had already fallen in love with you," she said, her voice breaking. "After I had given you real feelings. My father told me as a lesson, a reminder of my place in his grand plan. And I was too deep to turn back." She looked at Vincent, her eyes bloodshot and desperate. "I hate you, Vincent. Hate you because you never looked at me the way you looked at her. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, in your eyes I was always just Elizabeth's ghost. A cheap imitation, a replacement that was never good enough." Isabella turned to look at Nathan, and Ethan huddled behind Grace, her eyes full of anguish. "I hate your children. Hate them, because they are living proof of the love you gave to someone else. Every time I looked at them, I saw Elizabeth, saw everything I could never have, saw everything that was taken from me before I even had a chance to fight for it." She lowered the gun completely, her arm hanging limp at her side as if all strength had drained away. "And most of all, I hate myself. Hate that I became a monster. Hate that I hurt innocent children. Hate that I let my father turn me into a killing tool. Hate that even knowing all of this, I kept doing it." Tears streamed down Isabella's face, mixing with mascara into black smears across features that had once been perfect. She looked like a painting melting away, a work of art being destroyed from within. "Do you understand now?" she asked, her voice now only a whisper. "You are not the only victim here, Vincent. I am a victim too. Of my father, of fate, of choices I never truly had the freedom to make." Sirens tore through the Medford night. Blue and red lights flickered through the curtains, reflecting on the walls like ghostly streaks. The FBI had arrived, just as Grace said, just as Daniel had promised. Outside, the sound of cars braking hard, doors slamming shut, feet running on pavement. The 2 Romano assassins looked at each other in panic, then fled out the back door like rats seeking escape from a sinking ship. Isabella stood motionless in the middle of the living room, the gun still in her hand but hanging at her side. She looked out the window, looked at the FBI vehicles surrounding the house, looked at the figures in bulletproof vests moving into position. Then she turned back to look at Vincent, her eyes swollen from crying but still holding a spark that had not quite died. "I could end you right now," she said, her voice strangely calm. "Before they come in. At least I would complete part of the plan." Vincent looked straight into her eyes, without a trace of fear. "You could," he replied, "but you will not." Isabella tilted her head, a weary smile briefly crossing her lips. "How can you be so sure? You think you understand me that well after everything I just said?" "Because you are tired." Vincent spoke, his voice softening as if talking to a lost child. "Tired of hating, tired of being a puppet, tired of pretending every day that you are fine while you are falling apart inside. You have been running your whole life, Isabella. Running to please your father, running to prove your worth, running to escape the truth that you have never lived a life of your own." Tears rolled down Isabella's cheeks again, but she did not try to wipe them away. You think putting down the gun will change anything? I will still go to prison. Still rot there until I die. Vincent took another step forward, slow and unthreatening. Put down the gun, Isabella. Not for me. Not because the FBI is out there, but for yourself. He paused, now only an arm's length away from her. Let this be the last time you are someone's tool, the last time someone tells you what to do. Let this decision be yours. Yours alone. Silence. Tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Outside, a megaphone demanded those inside to surrender. Blue and red lights continued flashing, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Grace stood frozen behind, her hands still shielding the children, not daring to breathe too loudly. Isabella looked down at the gun in her hand, looked up at Vincent, looked at Grace and the children, then looked out the window where her old life waited to end. Then the gun clattered to the floor. Isabella collapsed to her knees immediately after, her head bowing, her shoulders shaking in waves. Her crying filled the room, no longer suppressed, no longer controlled. This was the crying of someone who had finally stopped running, the crying of a soul that had fought too long and had no strength left to continue. The front door burst open. FBI agents flooded in like a tide, guns pointed in every direction, flashlights sweeping across the room. Daniel Hayes led the way, his eyes quickly assessing the situation, seeing Isabella kneeling on the floor, seeing Vincent standing a few steps away from her, seeing Grace and the children safe in the corner. Situation is under control, Daniel ordered his team. 2 agents approached Isabella, gently but firmly handcuffing her and helping her to her feet. Daniel stepped to Vincent's side, his voice dropping low. Marco Romano was arrested 20 minutes ago in Boston. Along with 17 high-ranking members of the family, the entire Romano empire collapsed in one night. Vincent nodded but said nothing. His eyes were following Isabella as she was led toward the door. She turned to look at him one last time, her eyes swollen from crying, mascara smeared across her face, nothing remaining of the proud and cold Isabella Romano he had once known, only a broken woman, another victim of Marco Romano, even though she had also caused so much suffering. I am sorry, Isabella said, her voice now only a whisper. About Elizabeth, about everything. Then she was led away, disappearing into the night amid the blue and red lights of police cars. Vincent stood watching, the emotions inside him a tangled mess impossible to unravel. Hatred for Isabella, for what she had done to his children. Anguish over the truth about Elizabeth, but also a small part, very small, that pitied another shattered soul who had been swept up in Marco Romano's storm. 6 months later, autumn painted the streets of Ashland, Oregon, in gold. Maple leaves drifted down onto sidewalks, and the wind carried the first chill of the season through rows of trees changing their colors. At 524 Cedar Lane, a modest 2-story house with a white fence and a small flower garden in front, life was unfolding, so normally it was almost boring, and that was exactly what those living in that house wanted most. James Mitchell stood before the 10th grade classroom at Ashland High School, holding a well-worn copy of The Great Gatsby in his hand, his eyes resting on the attentive faces of his students. He wore a light blue shirt tucked neatly into his slacks, and black-framed glasses provided by the Witness Protection Program as part of his new identity. No one looking at this gentle, middle-aged man could ever imagine that he had once been Vincent Caruso, the notorious Mafia boss of Boston. Fitzgerald understood that we are all boats against the current, James told his students, his voice calm and thoughtful, pushed endlessly back into the past. No matter how hard we try, the past is always there, pulling us backward. He paused, looking toward the window where golden leaves drifted through the wind, and in that moment he was no longer a literature teacher, but a man living with the shadows of his former life. But that does not mean we stop rowing. We keep moving forward, even when the current resists us, because the effort, the daily struggle to become better, that is what makes us human. The class bell rang. Students gathered their books and bags. A few lingered to ask about assignments. James answered each question with a patience that Vincent Caruso had never possessed. When the classroom was empty, he remained seated alone for a few minutes, gazing at the vacant desks and wondering whether this was the life Elizabeth had once dreamed for him. He drove his old Toyota Camry home through the peaceful streets of Ashland, where neighbors waved to one another and children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. So different from Boston with its dark alleys and watchful eyes. Here, people did not need to look over their shoulders as they walked. Here, the laughter of children was not swallowed by the sound of sirens and distant gunfire. When James opened the door and stepped inside, the scent of cooking filled the air. Emily Mitchell sat at the kitchen table, her hair loosely tied in a messy bun, reading glasses slipping down her nose as she graded a stack of elementary school tests. She looked up at the sound of the door and smiled naturally. "One of my students wrote in her essay that her mother can fly because she is a witch," Emily said, her voice a mixture of annoyance and amusement. "I do not know what grade to give that." James laughed and leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Give her a high grade for creativity." In the living room, Ryan sat on the rug working on his math homework, his face serious in the exact same way James looked whenever he faced a difficult problem. The boy was 8 years old now, taller and thinner than he had been 6 months earlier, but his eyes no longer carried that frighteningly old gaze. When Emily passed by and gently teased him about a wrong answer, Ryan giggled, the clear sound ringing through the room like wind chimes. Tyler sat beside his brother, not doing homework but drawing with his new box of crayons. James stepped closer and looked over his son's shoulder at the picture he was making. 4 people stood in front of a house, holding hands, all smiling brightly beneath a golden sun. A father, a mother, a brother, and Tyler. A family. "Who is this, buddy?" James asked, though he already knew the answer. "It is us," Tyler replied proudly, holding up the picture. "The Mitchell family. I made the sun really big, because our house always has sunshine." That night, they ate dinner together around the oak table in the kitchen. Spaghetti with tomato sauce that Emily had cooked. Not perfect like the meals prepared by a private chef in Boston, but better than any dinner in that cold penthouse. They talked about school, about homework, about Tyler's new physical education teacher, about Ryan's new friend on the soccer team. Ordinary conversations to the point of being dull, ordinary in a way that felt miraculous. After dinner, James read to the children before bed. Harry Potter, Volume 3, Chapter 12. Ryan had heard the story many times, but still loved listening to his father read. Tyler curled up beside him, his eyes heavy with sleep, yet still struggling to stay awake until the chapter ended. But the scars were still there. They did not disappear simply because of a new address and a new name. Ryan still had nightmares from time to time. On nights when he screamed in his sleep, calling his brother's name, begging someone to stop, James would rush into the room, gather his son into his arms, and whisper that everything was over, that he was safe now, until the boy drifted back to sleep. Tyler still startled at loud shouts. A slamming door, a sudden dog barking, could freeze him in terror for a few seconds before he remembered he was no longer in Boston. Emily still checked the locks on the doors 3 times every night, still glanced over her shoulder when walking down the street, still carried a small knife in her purse even though Ashland was one of the safest cities in America, and James still woke, drenched in cold sweat at 3 in the morning, still heard Elizabeth calling his name in his dreams, still saw Ethan kneeling on the carpet, calling himself useless every time he closed his eyes. But they were healing, slowly, day by day. Every breakfast together was a small victory. Every laugh from the children was a step forward. Every night they slept safely in their little house on Cedar Lane was a reminder that the past did not have to define the future. Autumn night fell over Cedar Lane in perfect quiet. The last golden leaves of the season drifted gently onto the sidewalks, and the lights from surrounding houses gradually went out as the neighborhood slipped into sleep. James and Emily sat on the porch, 2 cups of hot tea in their hands, shoulders touching in the early season chill. The children slept soundly inside, the peaceful sleep of children who were finally safe. Emily looked out at the empty street, her voice gently breaking the silence. "Do you ever miss it? The power, the respect, the feeling of knowing exactly who you were and where you belonged?" James did not answer immediately. He looked up at the night sky, where the stars flickered, something he had never had time to notice when he was Vincent Caruso. "Sometimes," he admitted, "sometimes I wake up and forget where I am, forget who I am now. And for a few seconds, I remember the feeling of walking into a room and watching everyone fall silent. I remember the feeling of absolute power." He turned to look at Emily, and his eyes softened. "Then I remember that version of me as the one that got Elizabeth killed. I remember that because of that man, my son had to learn how to be silent in order to survive. And my son had to kneel and call himself useless." He took a deep breath, looking at the woman who had given him a second chance. "This life is better, Emily," he said, the new name rolling off his tongue with a warmth that made it real. "This quiet, this normalcy, being able to watch our children laugh every day, coming home knowing no one is waiting to harm my family. That is a luxury Vincent Caruso never had." Emily took his hand, their fingers entwining as naturally as if they had been made for one another. They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the rustling wind through the trees and the distant sound of crickets in the garden. Then James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Emily looked at the box, then at him, her eyes widening in surprise. "I never asked you the right way," James said as he opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring. No diamond, no display, just a plain band with one word engraved inside: together. We got married for cover, because the witness protection program needed us to look like a family. But that is not why I want to be with you. He turned fully toward her, holding both her hands in his. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that the wind couldn't carry to the neighbors. Grace Sullivan, he said, speaking the name like a secret prayer. Or Emily Mitchell. The name on the paper doesn't matter. I love the woman underneath. Will you marry me? Truly marry me. Not for cover, but because I love you, because I cannot imagine this life without you, because you saved me, saved my children, and gave me the chance to begin again. Tears streamed down Emily's cheeks. She could not speak, only nodded, then nodded again as if afraid he might not understand. Then she leaned in and kissed him. The kiss salty with tears and sweet with happiness. That night, lying beside one another in the small bedroom of their modest house on Cedar Lane, James thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a criminal empire to a literature teacher. From a luxury penthouse to an ordinary 2-story home. From Vincent Caruso to James Mitchell. From violence to peace. From collapse to healing. He reached for the locket on the nightstand, the only thing from his old life that he still carried. Inside it had once held only one photograph of Elizabeth. Now there were 3. Elizabeth on the left, her gentle smile forever frozen in time. Vincent in the center, an old photograph from before everything shattered. And Grace on the right, the steady gaze of the woman who had given him a reason to keep living. The past, the present, and the future. 3 pieces of one life. Some scars never fade, he whispered into the darkness, his fingers brushing lightly against the locket. But in the right hands, they become proof of survival. And survival is simply another way of speaking about love. Outside the window, Ashland slept peacefully beneath the quiet autumn night. The stars still shimmered in the sky, indifferent to the tragedies and triumphs of the people below. And inside the small house on Cedar Lane, a family built from brokenness dreamed of the future. A future where the past was only a distant shadow, no longer a threat. A future where the children once called useless would grow up knowing they were loved unconditionally. A future where love, even when it arrived late and after immeasurable pain, could still bloom. Some scars never fade, but in the right hands, they become proof of survival. And survival, Vincent had learned, is simply another way of speaking about love. The story of the Mitchell family on Cedar Lane is a reminder that it is never too late to change, that the past, no matter how dark, does not have to define the future, that love can grow in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes, losing everything is the very way we discover what truly matters. The greatest lesson this story offers is the value of family and the power of choice. Vincent once had everything: power, wealth, respect. Yet he nearly lost what was most precious, simply because he was not there when his children needed him. A busy life can sometimes make us forget that the people we love need our presence more than anything else in the world. Make time for your family. Listen to your children. And remember that no success is ever worth it if, along the way, we lose the ones we love. If this story has touched your heart, if you see yourself or someone you cherish reflected in these characters, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next emotional stories to come. Do not forget to like and share this video with the people you love, because sometimes a single story can change the way we look at life. Leave a comment below so that we can talk, share, and connect with one another through these life stories. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and daily peace of mind. Always cherish the people beside you, for they are the greatest treasure you will ever have. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.